This is my chosen son. Listen to him. Dear friends, on this second Sunday of Lent, we are invited to reflect on how obedient we are to the commands of God. Because disobedience is one of the greatest sins. Even when we look at the history of humankind, the greatest sin that was committed was the sin of disobedience, which was committed by our first parents, Adam and Eve. Their disobedience brought unto us death and sin. Why do I say so? Because after God created them and placed them in the garden, he gave them orders. You have liberty to use everything. Do not touch that fruit. That was a command that was issued. And they disobeyed that commandment, went and ate of that fruit. So the sin committed by Adam and Eve, which brought sin and death unto humanity, was the sin of disobedience. They disregarded God's commandment and did what they want. And obedience has become a struggle of human life. One of the greatest things that we all struggle is obedience. And so as we reflect on our humanness and our sinfulness, we are invited to also think about how obedient we are, or how disobedient we are to the commands of God. Because when you look at the gospel passage about Jesus going on the mountain and being transfigured, the highest point of that encounter was when the voice of the Father came. This is my chosen one. Listen to him. Our ability to listen is very key in the Christian life. Today we hear Abraham was called and he listened to God, and he says he demonstrated his faith and it was credited to him as righteousness. In the same way, in the second reading, Paul's letter to the Philippians, Paul says to the people, be imitators of me just as I am to Christ, and do not act as enemies of the cross. Why is he saying so? The cross is a symbol of obedience. That is why Philippians chapter 2 verse 4 says, Jesus was obedient to the Father, even obedient to death on the cross. So it was the obedience of Jesus through the cross that brought salvation to humanity. So the disobedience of Adam and Eve brought sin and death. The obedience of Jesus brought life, brought renewal to humanity. That is why as we go through Lenten period, we are being called upon to see, are we acting in obedience or we are doing what we want? What is obedience? Obedience is the dutiful submission to someone who issues a command or someone who has authority. Dutiful submission to somebody who issues a command and authority. And here it is God who has command over us. And he has issued a command. This is my chosen one. Listen to him. When I say obedient is a dutiful, it means it's an obligation. If you are called to duty, that means you have an obligation to do something. So obedience is not something that we can choose to say, I want to obey or I want to disobey. As a faithful Christians, you have the obligation to listen to God's voice. It is a submission because you yield your will to the one who issues the command. And we know that if we yield our will to the will of God, then we are being obedient unto him. That is where sometimes we get into conflict with our faith. This is what I want, as an individual. This is what the church or God requires of me. Should I abandon my personal will and embrace the will of God? That is where sometimes there is a tension between us. Even in the same way, when we bring this to our family setup, this is what my mom and my dad require of me. I have my will as a child. So do I relinquish or do away with my will and listen to the will of my mom and dad? And so there is conflict. Parents think that children are not listening to them. They are not submissive and allowing them to be guided. And so we get upset and we fight. And children think that my will is being curtailed. I cannot submit to my mom and dad. And so children also get upset. Dear friends, where there is obedience, there is harmony and there is peace. Where there is disobedience, there is always chaos and destruction. In marriages, if husbands and wives are able to obey and to listen to one another, will there be tension? No. So we are called to reflect on how we listen to each other. How obedient are we to the commands that God gives us? If we fail to obey, there will always be chaos in our lives. So Mother Church today is inviting us. Submit your will to God. Why? Because God will never lead you astray. If we say that the will of the Lord should prevail, that means we are being obedient. That is why Jesus will always say, I have come not to do my will, but the will of the one who sent me. I want you to ask yourself, are you living your life according to the will of God? Or you are doing what you want? Even in your marriage, are you marrying according to the will of God, or you are doing what you want? As a child in a family, are you submitting yourself that your parents, who are the representatives of God, you will listen to them so that they will lead you to the desired destination of your life? Obedience is very key. And it's a challenging thing. Why do people find it difficult to obey? People find it difficult to listen and to obey because we think that when we submit or we yield to somebody, it means we are weak. No. Obedience is not a sign of weakness. Obedience is a sign of love. It's a sign of trust and a sign of faith. Whenever we begin to obey people or we submit to them, it means we love them. That is why Jesus will say, if you love me, do whatever I tell you. If you love me, keep my word. So if you love your wife, if you love your mom and dad, why can't you trust them? Why can't you listen to them? So don't just say, oh, mom, I love you. Oh, dad, you are the best. And they say, sit down and you stand. Don't go there. I'm from there. Don't buy it. This is the change. So what is the sign of that love? So obedience should be your sign of faith. As Abraham obeyed God, and it says he demonstrated his faith, and it was credited to him as righteousness. May your obedience be the key to God's heart. If we obey God, we hold the key to his heart. He pours out his blessings upon us because we've yielded to him and said, Lord, thy will be done. Don't resist the will of God in your life because we need to obey. If you obey God, it means you trust him. I know that God, you will give me the best. That is why as children, if we know that our parents will give us the best, we should be able to submit to them and obey their commands. They will give you the best. It's a sign that I believed in you. So disobedience is the resource of unbelief. If I don't believe you, I'll not keep your word. I'll not trust whatever you say. So disobedience is a sign or a result of unbelief. But as we believe, that is why we are here, let us submit to God. And because Jesus wanted to lead Peter, James, and John to obedience, that is why he led them to the mountain. Because that was the basis. Simon Peter had Problem, when Jesus told him that he has to obey the Father's will by going to Jerusalem, suffer and die, Peter didn't accept that. So he wanted to lead Jesus to disobedience and told Jesus, don't say that. You are the child of God. You cannot die. And so Jesus took him to the mountain to open heaven to him for him to see the glory that will come from his obedience. And so when he saw the glory, he said, Lord, Master, it is good that we are here. Dear friends, obedience comes with a price. It is not easy. When you submit to people, you feel a pain. But the glory that comes after your submission is very great. Today we honor Jesus, we celebrate him, we bow before him, all because he obeyed the will of the Father. And so I want to recommend to you, let your obedience be your source of glory. Because whenever we obey, God will reward us. And the reward he will give us is the eternal life that we will enjoy in his presence. Today, Paul says to us in the second reading, our citizenship is in heaven. If we want to be with God forever, let us submit to him in obedience so that that glory that we are yearning and anticipating will come unto us. When a child always obeys the mom and the dad, it is easy for you to do something for that kid. It is easier for you to love your child when they listen to you. In the same way, when we also obey God, it becomes easy for God to give us all the spiritual benefits that we deserve. It is said that if you love the Lord, obedience will cease to be a burden. It will become a delight. If you love somebody, obeying that person will never be a challenge. It will be something that you will do with joy, with passion and enthusiasm. Why? Because I cherish my relationship with you. I don't want to lose that friendship. I don't want to lose that relationship. So I will obey you. I will listen to you so that I can keep you to myself. But if I don't cherish my friendship and my relationship with you, I don't care about what you say, but God's relationship is the best. So do your best this Lenten period. Don't just fast from cookies and candies and chocolate. Fast from disobedience. Say to yourself, throughout this Lenten period, I will listen and I will obey so that the glory of God will be upon you. May your obedience lead you to the eternal glory of God.